Clara Montgomery flung her last 3 coins across Ezekiel Cobb's counter, and they rang out like gunshots in the silent store. "I paid you honest money," she said, voice shaking, "and I'll be cursed before I crawl out of here empty-handed in front of these people." Every soul in Bitter Creek turned to stare at the woman they'd already buried alive, with their whispers. The outlaw's woman, the tainted one, the girl who lived when her brother died. Cobb shoved the coins back. "We don't sell to your kind." And that was when the door opened. If you're enjoying this story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and follow Clara's journey all the way to the end. I promise you it goes places you won't expect. And leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from, so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Now let's begin. The 3 coins lay scattered between them on the worn pine counter, and Ezekiel Cobb stared down at them like she had set 3 dead spiders on his clean wood. "I said we don't sell to your kind," Cobb repeated louder this time, because he wanted the others to hear it. He always wanted the others to hear it. "Take your money and go." "It's the same money any man in this town carries," Clara said. "Same silver, same weight. You took it from me last spring without complaint." "That was before." "Before what?" Cobb's jaw worked. He glanced sideways at the cluster of women near the dry goods, the 2 ranch hands by the door, the deputy leaning against the flour barrels with his arms crossed and a grin already crawling up under his mustache. Cobb fed on that grin. He stood a little straighter. "Before folks remembered who you ran with," he said. Clara did not move. She had learned over 3 long years that moving was what they wanted. They wanted her to flinch, to duck her head, to make herself small and slip out the door so they could laugh about it after. She kept her boots planted on the floorboards and her chin level, and she felt the heat of every stair in that room press against the back of her neck like a hot iron. "I never ran with anybody," she said. "I was 12 years old. I was a prisoner." "That ain't the story I heard." "You heard it from men who weren't there." "I heard it from honest men." "There's no honest men in this town," Clara said, and the words came out before she could stop them, sharp and clear, and the whole store went still. A woman near the calico fabric drew in a breath like she'd been slapped. That was when Deputy Harlan Clements pushed himself off the flour barrels. He was a big man, soft in the middle, but broad through the shoulders, and he moved the way men move when they have a badge to hide behind. He took his time crossing the floor. He let his spurs drag. He stopped a foot from her, closer than any decent man would stand to a woman, and he looked her up and down slow, the way a buyer looks over a horse he intends to lowball. "Now that's a hard thing to say about your neighbors, Miss Montgomery." His voice was almost gentle. That was the worst part of Harlan Clements. He could be gentle the way a cat is gentle with something it has already decided to kill. "These good people just want to live quiet, and here you come stirring up the air. Cobb don't have to sell you nothing. It's his store." "It's the only store for 40 miles. "Then maybe," Clements said, leaning in until she could smell the chaw on his breath, "you ought to think about the 40 miles. Maybe you ought to think real hard about a place that'd have you." "Get out of my face." "Or what?" He smiled. "You'll fetch the Holloway gang." "Oh, that's right." He snapped his fingers like he'd just remembered. "They hung. Every last one of them. Left you all alone, didn't they, sweetheart? Funny how the rope found them and missed you." Something flickered across Clara's face then, and she hated it, hated that he saw it. Because it was true, and it was the wound they all dug, at the one that never scabbed. The rope had missed her. Everyone she'd known in those dark years had swung, and she had walked away, and a town full of strangers had decided that a girl who survived must have earned her survival in some filthy way. They could not imagine an innocent thing living through what she had lived through. So they made her guilty. It was easier. It let them sleep. "My brother died protecting me," Clara said, very quiet now. "Daniel Montgomery, 18 years old. He put himself between me and a gun, and they shot him through the chest and left him in the dirt. You want to talk about who lived and who died, deputy? You say his name. You say my brother's name with your filthy mouth and see if I don't—" "See if you don't what?" Clements straightened. His hand drifted slow and deliberate to the butt of his pistol. The whole store watched it go. Go on, finish that. I'd surely like to hear how it ends. The silence stretched. A clock ticked somewhere behind the counter. Out on the street, a wagon rolled past and a dog barked, and inside Cobb's general store, nobody breathed. That's what I figured, Clements said softly, and he reached out and took her by the wrist. Not hard, almost tender. He wrapped his thick fingers around her wrist the way you'd take a child's hand to lead her across a road, and he started to turn her toward the door, and the casualness of it, the absolute certainty that he could put his hands on her, and no man in that room would say a word, was worse than any blow. Come on now, he said. Let's walk you out before you say something that gets you in trouble. Folks, show's over. Let go of me. I'm helping you, Miss Montgomery. Let go of me. Her voice cracked on it. Cobb, get the door. That was when the door opened on its own. A draft of cold mountain air rolled in across the floor, and the lamplight bent, and a shape filled the frame of the doorway that was too big for it, ducking under the lintel, and the whole store turned to look. The way a room turns when a storm has just walked in off the street. He was a head taller than any man in Bitter Creek. He wore a coat of oiled buckskin gone dark with age and weather, and his beard was streaked through with gray, though his eyes were sharp and young, and down the left side of his face ran a scar, old and pale, from his temple to the corner of his jaw. He carried a rifle in the crook of his arm, the way a man carries a thing he has forgotten. He owns easy, unthreatening, and somehow that was the most frightening thing about him. He did not look like a man who would need it. Nobody knew his name. They knew of him. The Mountain Man. The hermit up on Widow's Peak who came down maybe twice a year for powder and salt, and never said 10 words while he did it. Children told stories about him. Mothers used him to frighten their young ones into bed. Gideon Hayes, somebody had said once, but nobody knew for sure, and nobody had ever dared ask. He stood in the doorway, and his eyes moved across the room. Slow. He saw the women clutching their parcels. He saw Cobb behind the counter. He saw the ranch hands. And then his eyes came to rest on the deputy's thick fingers wrapped around the wrist of a girl who had gone white as bone, and they stopped there, and they did not move. Hayes, Cobb said, too loud, too quick. Didn't expect you down till come in, what do you... Let her go. It was the first thing he'd said. 3 words. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The words dropped into the silence, and lay there, and everybody heard them, and everybody understood that they were not a request. Clements's grin came back, but it was a different grin now, a stretched one. This is town business, friend. Lawman's business. You do well to... I count 3 coins on that counter, Gideon said. Honest silver. She paid. You got her flour ready. Now you listen here. You got it ready or not? Hayes, I don't think you understand the situation with this woman. I understand it fine. Gideon took 1 step into the store. Just 1. But the floorboards groaned under his weight, and the women near the dry goods shrank back, and Clements's hand twitched toward his gun again, and then went still, because the mountain man's eyes had dropped to that hand and were waiting on it. Patient, almost curious the way a man watches to see if a snake means to strike or just rattle. I understand a man's got his hand on a woman who told him 3 times to take it off. I understand there's a dozen of you and 1 of her. I understand not 1 soul in this room has lifted a finger. His gaze swept across them all, every face, and they could not meet it. That's about all there is to understand. She's an outlaw. One of the women blurted, the one near the calico, the one who'd gasped. She rode with murderers. You don't know what she... Did she pay? Gideon asked. The woman blinked. What? The girl. Did she put down honest money for honest goods? Nobody answered. Then sell her the flour, Gideon said, and let go of her wrist, and we can all go on about our day. Or don't. He shifted the rifle in his arm, not lifting it, not even close, just settling it, and the small motion sucked the air clean out of the room. And we'll find out what kind of day it is. Clara stood frozen between them, this stranger and this deputy, her wrist still caught in Clements's hand, and she could feel the deputy's grip slacken by degrees, his fingers loosening one at a time, the way a thing dies. And in 3 long years, it was the first time, the very first time that a man had stood in a room and looked at her and seen something worth standing up for. Not a curiosity, not a sin to be scolded, not a body to be leered at. He hadn't looked at her like Clemens looked at her. He hadn't looked at her with pity either, which she had learned to hate near as much as the cruelty. He had looked at her the way you'd look at any person, and then he had looked at the hand on her wrist, and that was all it took. Clemens let go. He did it slow to save what he could of his pride, peeling his fingers off her one at a time, and then stepping back and tugging his vest straight as if he had merely been adjusting it all along. "I was just walking her out," he muttered, "keeping the peace." "Peace is kept now," Gideon said. "You're new in this country, Hayes. You don't know how things run here. I've been in this country 30 years. Then you know this woman is poison. You stand up for her, you stand up for everything she done, every train her people robbed, every man they killed. That blood's on her, and now you want it on you." "I want my powder," Gideon said, "and I want her flour put up in a sack. That's all I want today. You got anything past that you can carry it on outside, and we'll discuss it where these good people don't have to watch." Clemens looked at him a long moment. Then he laughed short and ugly and grabbed his hat off the barrel. "You're gonna regret this, the both of you. Reed hears a stranger's making trouble over the Montgomery girl. Reed." And for the first time, something moved behind the mountain man's still eyes. A flicker. Josiah Reed. Clara's heart stopped, because she had never said that name to anyone in 3 years. She had carried it inside her like a stone swallowed whole, that name and what it belonged to, the thing she had seen in the dark of a boxcar, the thing the Holloway gang had died for, and she had lived for. Josiah Reed, the richest man in the territory, the man who shook the governor's hand at Christmas and gave a window to the church and had 100 head of cattle and 1,000 secrets, and one of those secrets had a girl's name on it, and that girl was standing in Cobb's general store, with her wrist throbbing where a deputy had held it. "Never you mind who," Clemens said, sliding his hat on. "You'll learn." He pushed past Gideon toward the door, careful, very careful not to brush against him. And at the threshold, he paused and looked back at Clara, with the cat smile gone, and something colder underneath it. "You should have froze in those mountains 3 years ago, girl," he said. "Would have saved everybody a heap of grief." And he was gone. The bell over the door rang, and then went quiet, and the store let out its breath all at once, and the women began gathering their parcels and murmuring and not looking at her. And Cobb stood behind his counter with his face gone gray, and Gideon Hayes set his rifle down across the flour barrels and looked at the storekeep and said, "Sack the flour." Cobb sacked the flour. His hands shook doing it. He scooped it out with a tin measure and funneled it into a cotton sack and tied the neck off with a length of twine. And the whole time he would not look at Clara. And Clara stood there watching him do the thing he had refused to do. The simple thing, watching it get done because one man had walked in off a mountain and made it get done, and she did not know what she felt. She thought it might be anger. It felt like anger. But underneath the anger was something that frightened her worse. Something soft and dangerous, because softness had been beaten out of her a long time ago, and she did not trust the way it crept back now fast at the sight of a stranger's broad back between her and the world. "There," Cobb said, shoving the sack across the counter. "There. Now both of you go on. Get out. I don't want trouble in here." "You made the trouble," Gideon said. "I didn't make nothing. The town decided about her years back. You just went along. What was I supposed to do?" Cobb's voice climbed high and thin. "You think I can cross Reed? You think any man in this town can cross Reed? She's marked Hayes. She's been marked since the day they brought her down out of those hills half dead, and she wouldn't say a word about where the gang's gold went. Everybody knows she knows. Everybody knows she's sitting on it. And anybody fool enough to take her side?" He stopped. He'd said too much. His eyes went to the door where the deputy had vanished, and the gray of his face deepened. But Gideon had gone still again, that deep stillness, and Clara saw him turn the words over. the way a man turns over a stone to see what's living underneath it. The gold. They thought she knew where the gold was. And as long as they thought that she would never be free of them, because greed has a longer memory than hate. And Josiah Reed was a man whose whole life was built on the difference between what he had and what he wanted. "How much do I owe you?" Clara said suddenly, to Cobb. Her voice was steady again. She had decided something in the last few seconds, though she could not have said what. "For the flour. The 3 coins enough or not?" Cobb stared at her. "The 3 coins," she said again. "Enough." "Yeah," he muttered. "Yeah, it's enough. Take it." She took the sack. It was heavier than she'd expected, and she nearly let it drag her down, but she caught it and got it up against her hip and turned, and she found herself face to face with the mountain man, who had picked his rifle back up off the barrels and stood watching her with those still eyes, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. "Thank you," Clara said. It came out rough. She wasn't used to the shape of the words anymore. "I didn't ask for it, but thank you." Gideon looked at her. Up close, the scar was worse. A deep seam through his cheek, and his eyes were a pale gray-green, like creek water under ice, and there was nothing in them she could read. No kindness she could lean on, and no cruelty she could brace against, just a flat, watchful calm. "You didn't have to ask," he said, and he tipped his hat to her. 2 fingers to the brim, a small dip of the head. The gesture every man in Bitter Creek made to every woman in Bitter Creek except her. 3 years and no man had tipped his hat to her. They'd decided she wasn't owed it. And this stranger off the mountain, this man who frightened grown ranch hands into the corners of a store, gave it to her plain, like it was nothing, like it was hers by right. It nearly broke her. She felt the sting come up hot behind her eyes, and she clamped down on it hard, because she would not weep in Cobb's store in front of these people. She'd sooner die. "You best go on home, ma'am," Gideon said. "Storm's coming down off the peak by nightfall. You feel that wind shift." "I've got nowhere," she started and stopped. She'd nearly said it. "I've got nowhere safe." She swallowed it. "I've got a place. Out past the Reed line. Old line shack nobody wanted." Something moved in his face. "Reedland. Borders it. It's not his. It was abandoned. I fixed the roof myself." "Reed know you're on it." "Reed knows everything," Clara said. "That's the trouble." Gideon was quiet a moment. Then he nodded once, like a man filing something away. "Get your flour home before that storm. Get a fire going. Don't open your door for anybody tonight." He turned to go, and then stopped, and looked back, and for the first time, something almost like a question crossed his face, like he was surprised to find himself saying it. "What's your name? Your given name, not what they call you." "Clara," she said. "Clara Montgomery." "Gideon Hayes," he said. And then he was at the door, and the bell rang, and the cold came in, and he was gone up the street, the way he'd come, and Clara stood alone in the silence of Cobb's General Store, with a sack of flour on her hip and a name in her mouth, and the first warm thing she'd felt in 3 years, burning small and stubborn in her chest, like a coal that won't go out. She did not know it yet, but everything had already begun. She walked out into the wind. It had shifted just like he'd said, swung around to come down off Widow's Peak hard and cold and smelling of snow, and the few people on the boardwalk drew back from her as she passed mothers pulling children close, men finding somewhere else to look. The marked woman, the tainted one. She kept her chin up and walked through the middle of them and made them be the ones to step aside, and they did every one. And she carried that small victory home, like she carried the flour awkward and heavy, and hers. But behind her in the doorway of the saloon across the street, Deputy Harlan Clements watched her go. And beside him stood a tall man in a fine wool coat, with a silver watch chain across his vest and gray at his temples, and a face that smiled easy at church and did not smile. Now a man who owned half the county and wanted the other half, and had spent 3 years waiting for a frightened girl to break, and Josiah Reed turned his head and said something low to the deputy, and the deputy nodded, and the two of them watched Clara Montgomery walk out toward the line shack on the edge of the storm. "She talked to him," Reed said. "The mountain man. Cobb says he stood up for her." "He don't know nothing," Clements said. "Stranger, hermit. He'll be back up his mountain by morning. Maybe. Reed pulled his gloves on slow, finger by finger, the same way Clements had peeled his fingers off the girl's wrist. But 3 years she's said nothing. 3 years she's been alone and afraid and said not one word. And the first man comes along who'll look her in the eye. He let it hang. Women break 2 ways, Harlan. They break when you frighten them, or they break when they finally feel safe. I've been working on the first way a long while now. I don't much care for the look of the second. You want me to? I want you to do what I told you to do tonight, Reed said. The storm's a gift. The storm's the best friend we've had in 3 years. A woman alone in a line shack in a blizzard well. He smiled then finally, and it was a terrible thing to see. Nobody's surprised when the cold takes a woman like that. Nobody mourns her. And whatever she knows goes into the ground with her where it should have gone a long time ago. And if she talks before then, if she tells the mountain man what she saw on that train, Reed's smile did not waver. Then we'll have to talk to the mountain man too. He stepped down off the saloon porch and settled his hat against the rising wind. But first things first, tonight she freezes. See that she does. And Harlan, he paused. Make sure that door won't open from the inside. I don't want her getting out and wandering off and being found alive and grateful by some fool with a sled. I want this finished tonight. The wind howled down off Widow's Peak, and the first hard flakes came stinging out of the gray, and far up the road, a woman with a sack of flour bent her head against the cold and walked on toward a shack, where a man had already gone ahead of her in the dark to nail her windows shut. She had felt safe for the first time in 3 years. It was the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to her. The walk to the line shack took an hour in good weather. That night, it took 3. Clara bent into the wind with the flour sack hugged against her chest, and the snow came down so thick she lost the road twice and had to feel for the wagon ruts with her boot. Her fingers went from cold to burning to gone. By the time the dark shape of the shack rose up out of the white, she could not feel her own hands, and she did not care, because there was a fire inside that wall and a door she could bar, and she had carried home flour she'd paid for in front of the whole town, and a stranger had tipped his hat to her. She got the door open against the wind and shouldered it shut and dropped the bar and stood there in the dark shaking. Made it, she said to the empty room. She'd taken to talking out loud in the last 3 years. There was nobody else to do it. Made it home, Daniel. You'd have laughed to see me stare down half that town. Her voice cracked on her brother's name the way it always did. He tipped his hat to me. A grown man. Tipped his hat like I was anybody. She fumbled for the lamp. Lit it. The small flame steadied, and the room came up around her. Her one room, her table, and her cot, and her brother's old coat on its nail. And she set the flour on the table and started in on the fire, because the cold was the kind that kills, and she knew it. The kindling caught. She fed it. She held her ruined hands out to the flame and bit down on a scream when the feeling came back into them, that fire needle agony, and she rode it out the way she'd ridden out worse, and when it passed, she put the kettle on and sat down hard on the edge of the cot. That was when she noticed the window. There was a draft she didn't know, a thin whistle of wind coming through where wind had never come before, and she frowned at it and got up and crossed to the window with the lamp and held it close to the glass. Somebody had nailed it shut. Fresh nails. Driven in from the outside, the heads bright and unrusted, 4 of them sunk deep into the frame. She stared at them. She did not understand them. Why would a man nail her window shut and leave her the door? Then she crossed to the back window, the little one over the wash basin, and held the lamp up, and that one was nailed too. 4 more bright nails, and the cold dropped into her stomach like a swallowed stone. No, she said. No, no. She ran to the door and threw off the bar and shoved. It opened. Of course it opened. They'd left her the door. She stood in the doorway with the snow howling past her, and she understood all at once the whole shape of it, the cruelty and the cleverness of it. They didn't lock her in. A locked door was murder. A locked door was a thing a sheriff might ask questions about come spring when the body was found. No. They'd nailed her windows so she couldn't break out the side and run for the trees in the dark. They'd left her one way out the door, The front the open ground, the road back toward Bitter Creek, where they'd be waiting. They wanted her to run. They wanted her to choose between freezing in a shack and freezing in the open, and either way the storm did the killing, and either way Josiah Reed's hands stayed clean. "You sons of—" The wind tore the words away. She slammed the door, barred it, pressed her back against it, and slid down to the floor and made herself think. Because thinking was the only thing that had ever kept her alive. They wanted her dead tonight. Tonight, not next week. Why tonight? What had changed? And she knew. She'd known the second Reed's name left the deputy's mouth in Cobb's store. 3 years she said nothing, and then a stranger walks in and looks her in the eye, and suddenly the silence isn't safe anymore. Suddenly the frightened girl who never talked might find somebody to talk to. Reed didn't fear her hatred. He'd counted on her hatred. Hatred kept her quiet and alone. What Reed feared was the other thing, the warm thing, the thing that had lit in her chest at the touch of a tipped hat, because a woman who feels safe is a woman who finally speaks. She'd gotten Gideon Hayes a death sentence too, most likely, just by thanking him. "Stupid," she whispered. "Stupid, stupid girl." The fire popped. The kettle began to tick, and under the wind out in the white she heard a horse. She went still. A horse, and then a second horse, and then a man's voice raised over the storm, and she could not make out the words, but she knew the easy, ugly music of it. She'd been hearing it her whole life in this town, and she got up off the floor and put her back to the wall beside the door, and she reached up and took her brother's old coat off its nail and pulled it on, because if she was going to die, she'd die in Daniel's coat. The fist hit the door like a gunshot. Miss Montgomery. Clements. Of course it was Clements. "Open up. It's the deputy. Come to check on you in this weather. Wouldn't be right a woman alone out here storm like this." She said nothing. "I know you're in there. Got a fire going. I can see the chimney. Open the door, Clara. Be neighborly." "Go back to town, Harlan." A pause. Then a low laugh shared with whoever rode with him. "Now that ain't neighborly at all. I know what you came to do." "Did you now? And what's that?" "You nailed my windows. You came to drive me out into it." "Well, I'm not coming out. You want me dead, you'll have to break this door and do it with your own hands, and then you'll have to explain the door to the marshal come spring. Reed won't like that. Reed wants it clean, so you go back and tell him his girl wouldn't run." There was a long silence on the other side of the door, and Clara let herself believe for one foolish second that she'd won. Then Clements said, almost admiring, "You always were smarter than they gave you credit for." And then away from the door to the other man, "Get the coal oil." The bottom fell out of her. "Reed wants it clean." Clements went on conversational, raising his voice for her benefit. "But Reed ain't out here freezing his hindquarters off, is he? Reed's home by his fire. And a shack like this old drywood, a woman careless with her lamp in a storm, well, fires happen. Sad thing. Real sad. They'll find what they find come spring, and there won't be enough of it to ask a question over." A thump against the wall. The slosh of liquid. "Anything you want to say, you best say it quick, Clara. Or you can tell me where Reed's gold is, and maybe I leave you the door." "There is no gold," she screamed. "There never was any gold. You fool, the gang spent it. They spent it before they hung. There's nothing. There was never anything that's not what I saw." "Then what did you see?" And there it was. The question under all the questions. The thing they'd been circling for 3 years. Clara pressed her hand over her own mouth, because the answer was the only thing keeping her alive, and the only thing getting her killed, and she'd kept it locked behind her teeth so long that letting even a piece of it out felt like opening a vein. "You don't want me to answer that, Harlan," she said, "because the second I do, you can't let me live. And the second I do, you'll know it's the one thing Reed never told you. You're his dog. He doesn't tell his dog where the bones are buried." Silence. She'd struck something. She could feel it through the door the way Clements went still, and she pressed it because it was all she had. "That's it, isn't it? You don't even know what you're killing me to keep quiet. He's got you out here in a blizzard committing murder for him, and he never told you why. You ever ask yourself what a man like Reed does with a witness once she's served her purpose? You ever wonder if you're a witness too? Harlan, you're standing right here. You'll know I'm dead. You'll know how. How long you figure Reed lets a man walk around who knows how? Light it, Clemens said. The first orange glow bloomed at the base of the back wall. Clara smelled the oil smoke and heard the dry old timber take the flame with a sound like a held breath. Let go, and she shoved off the wall and grabbed the kettle off the fire and threw open the bar and came out the front door, not running, not the way they wanted, but low and fast and sideways, and she flung the boiling water at the shape nearest her in the dark. The man screamed. Not Clemens, the other one. He clawed at his face and went down off the porch into the snow, and Clara was already past him, already gone off the porch on the far side and into the white with Daniel's coat flapping and her lungs full of fire. She's out. She's running. Get her. She heard the horse come around. She did not look back. She ran for the only dark in all that white, the tree line, the timber that climbed up toward the peak, because a horse couldn't follow her into the deep timber, and a man on foot couldn't catch her if she was already among the trees. And she ran the way she had run once before, 3 years ago, through a different dark. With her brother's blood on her hands, ran past the point where her body wanted to quit. Past the point of feeling into the place where there was only the next step and the next. A shot cracked behind her. The snow kicked up to her left. Clemens firing blind into the storm. She zigzagged. Another shot. Nothing. And then the trees closed over her black trunks rising up on every side, and the wind dropped to a moan in the high branches, and she did not stop. She climbed. She did not know where she was going. Up, away. Toward the only place she'd ever heard of where a man lived alone and answered to no town, the only direction in the whole frozen world that wasn't Bitter Creek. Behind her faint she heard Clemens bellowing into the storm. Run then! Run, you crazy witch! Ain't nothing up that mountain but the cold and a hermit, and the cold'll take you first. You hear me? You'll be froze stiff by midnight, and we'll find you come spring, and nobody'll mourn you. Nobody. Nobody. His voice died in the trees. She climbed until she couldn't. She did not know how long. The cold had stopped hurting, which she knew was the worst sign of all. She'd heard the old trappers say it when it stops hurting. That's the cold getting into the blood. That's the body giving up the fight, and she fought it. She slapped her own face and bit her own lip until it bled to keep the pain alive in her, because pain was life. But the snow kept coming, and the dark kept deepening, and her legs went from burning to wood to nothing. And somewhere on that mountain she fell, and could not remember falling. Only found herself on her knees in the white with no memory of going down. Get up, she told herself. Get up, Clara. Daniel didn't die so you could quit on a hill. Get up. She got up. She fell again. This time, she got as far as her hands and knees and stayed there swaying, and the snow was so soft, that was the trick of it. The terrible mercy of it. It looked so soft, like a bed. Like the cot. Back home. Like sleep, and a voice in her that sounded like her brother's, said just for a minute. Clara, just lie down for 1 minute and rest, and then you'll get up. And she knew that voice was the cold-wearing Daniel's face, and she hated it, and she could not fight it anymore. I'm sorry, she said to the snow, to her brother, to the stranger who'd tipped his hat and gotten nothing for it but a target on his back. I'm sorry. I tried. I did try. And she lay down in the white. The snow came down over her. It was not cold anymore. It was almost warm, almost kind, and the wind sang her down toward the dark. And the last thing she saw before her eyes closed was the lamplight gold of a fire that wasn't there. A fire she was walking toward, and a man's broad shape against it, and she thought, that's a good way to go. Dreaming of a warm thing, and she let go. She did not hear the snowshoes. She did not hear the man who had stood at his cabin window an hour before and watched a glow rise up from the valley where the line shack stood, a glow that grew and did not stop growing. A glow, the shape of a building burning, and who had stood there a long moment with his jaw working, and then said one word out loud to his empty cabin. Reed, and taken down his coat and his rifle and gone out into a storm. No sane man went out into following. Nothing. Following a feeling, following the memory of a girl who'd said, "I've got nowhere safe," and then caught herself. She did not hear Gideon Hayes calling her name into the wind. She was past hearing. She did not hear him find her. She came back to the world in pieces. Heat first. Heat so fierce it felt like the boiling water she'd flung, and she fought it, moaned, tried to crawl away from it, and a voice said low and rough, "No. No, you stay by that fire. You stay right here. Daniel. Ain't Daniel." She forced her eyes open. They didn't want to. And there above her, lit orange by a fire, was a scarred face. She knew a beard streaked with gray, pale eyes like creek ice, and she did not believe it. She thought she'd died, and her dying mind had reached for the one warm thing it had, and she said, "You're not real. Real enough." He had her wrapped in furs. He was rubbing her hands between his, hard, too hard it hurt, and she understood dimly that the hurt was the point. The hurt was him chasing the cold back out of her. "Don't sleep. You hear me, Clara? You don't sleep yet. Talk to me. Say something." "You came," she said. "Why'd you come? You don't know me." "Saw the fire." His jaw was tight. "Saw your shack burning from my window. Figured a woman who told me she had nowhere safe wasn't safe." He worked her fingers. "Was I wrong?" "No." A tear ran sideways down her temple and froze halfway. "No, they came. Clements. He had another man. They nailed my windows so I couldn't run for the trees. They wanted me to run up the road where and when I wouldn't come out, they burned it. They burned it with me in it." His hand stopped for just a second. Then they kept moving, but something had changed in his face, gone harder, gone somewhere cold and very far away. And when he spoke, his voice was so quiet, she barely heard it over the fire. "They burned a woman's house in a blizzard," he said. "To kill her. For Reed. For Reed." He said the name like he was tasting something rotten. "What's Reed to you, Clara Montgomery Truth now? You're like to die tonight, and a person shouldn't die holding a secret all alone. What does the richest man in this territory want bad enough to burn a girl alive in the snow?" And Clara Montgomery, half dead wrapped in a stranger's furs in a cabin she'd dreamed her way to, looked up into the only face in 3 years that had never once looked at her with disgust, and felt the thing behind her teeth come loose at last. "He wasn't supposed to be on that train," she whispered. "What train?" "The Holloway gang. They didn't just rob trains, Mr. Hayes. Somebody told them which trains, which cars, when the strongbox would be heavy and when the guards would be light. Somebody on the inside. For 3 years everybody's asked me where the gold went. The gold, like it was about gold." A laugh tore out of her, thin and terrible. "It was never about the gold. The gold's gone spent. It doesn't matter. What matters is I was in that boxcar the night the man who told them came to collect his share. I was 12. They thought I was asleep. I wasn't asleep. I saw his face. I heard his name." Gideon had gone perfectly still. "Reed," she said. "Josiah Reed. The man who shakes the governor's hand. He planned the robberies that built half his fortune, and then, when the law closed in, he sold the Holloway gang to the marshals to save himself. Every one of them hung on his word. And the only person left alive who saw him in that car. Who knows the great Josiah Reed is a thief and a murderer who sent his own partners to the rope is me." Her voice broke entirely. "Is me. A 12-year-old girl who didn't have the sense to keep her eyes shut. That's why they hate me in that town. He told them I rode with the gang. He told them I was the gang's whore. He made me the villain so that if I ever did talk, nobody would believe a word out of my mouth. 3 years. 3 years I've been the tainted woman so that the truth would die with me, and tonight he decided 3 years was long enough." The fire cracked and spat. The wind clawed at the cabin walls. And Gideon Hayes sat back on his heels and looked at her for a long, long moment. And Clara braced herself, because this was the part where they always changed, where the disgust came up, or the disbelief, or worst of all, the pity, and she waited to see which one it would be. It was none of them. "How old are you now?" he said. The question was so far from anything she expected that she just stared at him. 23. "Why? 12 years old," he said slow, like he was working it out like it mattered. 12 years old, and you watched your brother die and got drug off by killers, and then a grown man with money and a badge for a dog decided to make the whole world hate you, so his secret'd stay buried. His hands had closed into fists on his knees. And for 11 years you carried it, alone. And not one soul in that whole town ever once asked if maybe the frightened child was telling the truth. They didn't want the truth. The truth's expensive. The lie was free. "No," Gideon said. "The lie cost you everything. They just didn't have to pay it." And something in the plain, hard justice of that, something in the fact that this silent stranger off the mountain had understood in 1 minute what she'd been screaming into the void. For 11 years broke the last thing left in Clara that was holding, and she wept. She wept the way she had not let herself weep in front of a living soul since she was a child. Great heaving sobs that hurt her frozen chest, and Gideon Hayes did not tell her to stop, and he did not awkwardly pat her, and he did not say, there. He just put another log on the fire and built the heat up higher and let her cry. And when she was done crying, he held a cup of something hot to her cracked lips and said, "Drink. Slow." She drank. It was broth. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. "You shouldn't have come for me," she said when she could talk again. "You hear me? You shouldn't have. They'll know. Cobb saw you stand up for me. The whole store saw it. And now Clements thinks I'm dead in that fire, but come spring when there's no body." "There's no body because you're in my cabin. That's what I'm telling you. When they figure that out, when they figure out you're the reason his clean little murder didn't take, Reed'll come for you too. I've gotten you killed. I've done to you exactly what I do to everybody who's ever been fool enough to be kind to me. I'm sorry. God, I'm sorry. You have to take me back down. You have to put me out somewhere far and tell them you never..." "Stop." She stopped. Gideon Hayes set the cup down. He looked into the fire a while, and when he spoke, it was not loud, but there was a weight under it, like bedrock under thin soil. 20 years ago, he said, I had a wife." Clara went still. "Down in the territories, long way south of here. I wasn't always a man who lived on a mountain." He turned the cup slowly in his big scarred hands. "There was a man down there with money and friends and a smile he wore to church same as Reed. He wanted my land. My water really, but you can't have one without the other. And when I wouldn't sell, he didn't come at me. Men like that never come at you. They came at her. Burned us out one night when I was 3 days' ride at the cattle market. By the time I got the word and rode back..." The cup went still in his hands. Wasn't enough left to bury proper. The fire popped. Clara did not breathe. "I went a little mad after," Gideon said, simple as stating the weather. "Did some things. Found the man. The law called it murder. Maybe it was. I didn't much care what they called it. And after I couldn't be around people anymore, couldn't stand the sight of a town the way they all just go along, the way they look the other way, while a man with money does what he pleases. So I came up here. 20 years. Told myself I was done. Told myself it wasn't my business anymore what men do to each other down in the valley." He finally looked at her, and there was something burning low and steady behind the ice of his eyes. "And then I stood in a store today and watched a whole town go along while a girl got her wrist twisted and her bread refused, and not one of them moved, and I knew them. I knew every one of them. Met them 20 years ago and 1,000 miles from here." His jaw set. "So don't you tell me I shouldn't have come for you, Clara Montgomery. You're the first thing in 20 years I came down off this mountain for, and no man named Reed is ever again going to burn a woman in the snow while I'm close enough to smell the smoke." The fire roared up bright between them, and Clara understood lying there in the furs, with the heat finally reaching her bones, that she had not stumbled half dead to the door of a stranger after all. She had been carried through a blizzard by a man who had spent 20 years waiting without knowing he was waiting for exactly this. For her. For the chance to stand in the place he'd failed to stand once before. Reed had made one mistake in 3 years of careful cruelty. He'd driven a woman with a witness's eyes straight up a mountain into the arms of the one man in all that country who could not ever go along. "They think I'm dead," she said slowly, sitting up a little, the broth and the fire and the man's terrible calm steadying something in her. "Clements thinks I burned. Reed thinks his witness is ash. For now, that's—" She stared at the fire, and for the first time in 11 years, something that was not despair began to move behind her violet eyes. Something with a shape to it. Something with a plan. "Mr. Hayes, a dead witness can't be hunted. A dead witness can't be feared. As long as Reed thinks I'm gone, he'll be careless. He'll relax. And a careless man makes mistakes a witness can use," Gideon finished. He was looking at her now with something new in his face, something that might almost have been respect. "You don't think much like a woman who is about to lie down and die in the snow. I was 12 years old when I learned that the only thing they can't take from you is what you know." She pulled the furs tighter. "They took my name, my home, my brother, my whole life. They left me the truth because they thought the truth would die with me. So let me be dead, Mr. Hayes. Let me be good and dead all winter long. And come the spring thaw." Her voice hardened into something Bitter Creek would not have recognized, something the frightened, tainted woman had never once shown them. "Come the spring. Let's you and me go down that mountain and show Josiah Reed exactly how wrong a clever man can be." For the first time since she'd met him in the orange light of the fire that had pulled her back from the dead, Gideon Hayes almost smiled. "Rest," he said, and rose and took up his rifle and moved to the window to watch the storm and the dark valley below, where a man warm by his own fire did not yet know that the woman he'd murdered was sitting up in the mountains alive and learning his name like a prayer. Long winter ahead. You'll need your strength. Outside, the snow came down and down, burying the world, burying the burned shack, burying the tracks of a man on snowshoes who had carried a half-frozen woman up a mountain, burying every sign that Clara Montgomery had ever walked out of that fire alive. The whole valley slept under the white certain she was gone, and high above it, behind a single window, lit gold against the storm, she was very much awake. Winter held the mountain for 3 months, and in 3 months, Clara Montgomery learned how to live again. She learned it slow, the way you learn to walk on a leg that's been broke. The first weeks she did little but sleep and eat and sit by the fire, while Gideon Hayes moved around her like weather quiet, never crowding, never asking more than she had to give. He hunted. He hauled wood. He mended snowshoes and traps and the chinking between the logs, and he talked to her when he talked the way a man talks to a half-wild thing. He doesn't want to spook easy and low and from a little distance. "You don't have to keep your back to the wall when you eat," he told her one night, watching her edge her stool around so no part of the room was behind her. "Nothing's coming through that door I can't stop." "Habit," Clara said. "Bad habit. Kept me alive. It did." He set a plate down in front of her. Venison and biscuit. He'd taught himself to bake badly in 20 years alone, and his biscuits sat like river stones, but she ate every one. "But you ain't fighting to stay alive anymore, Clara. You're fighting to get something back. Different fight. Needs you rested, not jumping at shadows." She looked at him across the fire. "You talk like a man who's planned a war before. I told you what I did after my wife." His face didn't change. "I planned that careful. Took me 4 months. I won't tell you it brought me peace because it didn't, and I'd not want you thinking it will. But I'll tell you this." He sat down across from her. "A man who burns a woman's house to keep a secret is a man who's been getting away with things a long, long time. And men who get away with things get sloppy. They start to believe their own story. They believe nobody can touch them, and the day a man believes that is the day he leaves a door open." He nodded at her. "You're alive. That's a door Reed left open and don't even know it. We just gotta find the rest." So they began. In the long dark evenings with the wind howling down off the peak and the fire snapping between them, Clara told him everything. Not in a rush, the way it had come out the first night half frozen, but slow and careful. Every detail she'd buried for 11 years, and Gideon listened with the patience of stone. and now and then asked a question that turned the whole thing sideways and showed her something she'd never seen in it. "This man who came to the boxcar," he said one night. "The one who collected Reed's share. You said Reed. But you said you were asleep, or they thought you were. You saw a face by firelight. You heard a name." He leaned forward. "Did you hear them call him Reed, or did you put the name on the face after when you came down and learned who the rich man was?" Clara opened her mouth, closed it. A cold ran through her that had nothing to do with the winter. She pressed her hands to her face, hauling herself back 11 years into the dark, and the smell of the boxcar, and the low voices she'd strained to hear. "They called him—" She stopped. "Boss. They called him Boss. And the boss he called the man who came, he called him—" Her breath caught. "Josiah. He called him Josiah. I heard it. I know I heard it. And when I came down off that mountain and saw Reed for the first time in the street with everybody bowing and scraping, somebody said his name, and it was the same face. It was him. Older, cleaner, but the same face. I'd swear it on Daniel's grave." "I believe you," Gideon said. "I do. But Clara—" His voice was gentle, and it was terrible. A girl's memory of a face by firelight 11 years gone against the richest man in the territory and his bought judge and his hired badge? That's not enough. That's never going to be enough. They'll say you're confused. They'll say you're lying to save your own neck. They'll say exactly what they've said for 3 years, that you rode with the gang, and you'll say anything. He let it sit. "We don't bring Reed down with what you saw. We bring him down with what he did. There's got to be paper. A man doesn't run robberies for years and sell his partners to the rope without there being paper somewhere. Bank records. A man he paid. A man he didn't pay enough." He looked into the fire. "Somewhere in that valley is a man who knows what you know and lived. We find him. We find the paper. And then your face by the firelight stops being a crazy woman's story and starts being the last nail." Clara stared at him. "How does a man who's lived alone on a mountain 20 years know how to bring down a rich man?" "Because 20 years ago," Gideon said, "I did it wrong. I went straight at mine with a gun and I killed him. And you know what happened? Nothing changed. His partners divided his land. His widow remarried his banker. The town that looked the other way for him looked the other way for the next one. I got my revenge, and the wickedness just flowed on around the hole I'd made in it, like a river round a stone." He stood restless now and went to the window. "I won't do that again. A bullet in Reed solves nothing. It just makes you the murderess they already say you are. No, we don't kill Josiah Reed, Clara. We ruin him. We take his money and his name and his church pew and his friends, and we leave him alive to watch it all burn the way he watched your shack burn. That's the only justice that ever sticks. The kind the wicked have to live inside of." Outside the wind screamed, and inside by the fire, a frightened girl who had spent 3 years making herself small felt something she had not felt since she was 12 years old sit up straight inside her chest. Hope, with teeth in it. The weeks turned. The bond between them deepened in the slow way of two people sharing one room and one fire and one terrible purpose through the dead of a mountain winter. Clara mended his clothes, which were a disgrace, and found she liked the work, liked making a torn thing whole. Gideon taught her to read the weather off the peak, to tell 3 hours ahead when a storm was coming by, the way the cold settled in the trees. They did not speak of what was growing between them. The easy silences, the way she'd stopped keeping her back to the wall, the way his eyes followed her across the room and then looked quick away. There was no room in either of them yet for that. But it was there. It grew the way the seed had grown that first day in Cobb's store, when a man tipped his hat slow and stubborn and reaching toward light. And then on a gray afternoon in the first thaw, it nearly ended. Gideon had gone down the mountain. He'd waited for the worst of the snow to break, and then he'd taken his rifle and his snowshoes and gone down toward the valley to do the thing they'd planned all winter, to find the man who knew what Clara knew and lived. He had a name now. She'd given it to him, dragged up out of the boxcar memory, a name the gang had used for a man who came and went. A man who wasn't one of them, but did business with them. Amos Tucker. A freighter. A man who hauled goods, and Clara was near certain hauled other things too. Hauled the word from Reed to the gang about which trains and which cars the inside man's messenger. If Tucker's alive, Gideon had said, pulling on his coat that morning. And if he's the kind of man who keeps a thing to use against a man like Reed someday, then he's the one we need. I'll find him. I'll feel him out. I won't say your name. He'd paused at the door. You bar this behind me. You don't open it for anybody but my voice. You hear? I hear. Say it back. I don't open the door for anybody but you. She'd almost smiled. You sound like a worried husband, Mr. Hayes. He'd looked at her for a moment, something flickering behind the ice. I sound like a man who's lost a thing to carelessness before, he'd said quietly, and don't intend to again. And then he'd gone out into the gray down toward the valley. He'd been gone since dawn. It was past dark now. Clara sat by the fire with his old pistol in her lap, the one he'd left her, and she watched the door, and she did not let herself think the thoughts that wanted thinking. He'd said it might take a day. It might take 2. Tucker might be hard to find. He might have to watch pick his moment. There were 100 reasons a man could be late off a mountain. She told herself all 100 of them, and believed none. The fire burned low, and then faint outside through the wind, she heard it. Boots on the snow. She came up off the stool with the pistol leveled, her heart slamming, and she stood in the middle of the room with the gun pointed at the door, and she did not call out because Gideon had told her his voice, and nothing else, and she would wait for his voice if it took all night. The boots stopped outside the door. Silence. Clara. A whisper. Hoarse. Wrong. Clara, open up. She did not move. It was a man's voice. It might have been his. The wind tore at it, blurred it. But there was something off in it, something strained, and Gideon Hayes did not whisper. Gideon Hayes spoke low, but he spoke plain, and the hair stood up on the back of her neck. Say my name, she called. Say it the way you say it. A pause. Clara Montgomery, the voice said. Open the door, it's cold. And she knew. She knew with a sick certainty that dropped through her like the cold through the boxcar floor 11 years gone. He never used her last name. Not once, not since the first night. To Gideon, she was Clara, only ever Clara. The man at the door knew her name, but not the man she'd become up here, and that meant the man at the door had learned her name from somebody who hated her. Harlan Clements, she said. The whisper stopped. And then a low chuckle came through the wood, and the false hoarseness fell away, and it was the deputy's voice, smooth and ugly and amused. Now, how'd you go and figure that out? Clements said. I had it down so nice. Where is he? Her voice shook. The pistol shook. What did you do to him? Your mountain man? Oh, we had us a real interesting day, your mountain man and me. Wood creaked. He was leaning against the door. See, Mr. Reed never did believe you burned up in that shack. No body, no bones, nothing but ash and a busted door, and Reed's a careful man. He had me watching the mountain all winter, watching for smoke. And wouldn't you know there's been a fire burning up on Widow's Peak every single night since December, in a cabin that's supposed to have one half-mad hermit in it, who don't hardly use a fire account of how he likes the cold. A nail of cruelty entered his voice. 2 plates. My man with the spyglass, he saw 2 plates set out on a stump one morning. 2 plates, Clara. Hermits don't set 2 plates. Clara's blood went to water. They'd known. All winter while she healed and hoped and let herself feel safe, they'd known she was alive. They'd been watching, waiting. And she'd led them straight to the one man who'd, where is Gideon? Came down the mountain this morning asking around about Amos Tucker. Clements said, conversational, savoring it. Old Amos. Now that was a name I didn't expect to hear out of a hermit's mouth. Soon as your man started sniffing after Tucker, well, that told Mr. Reed everything he needed to know. Told him you're alive. Told him you've been talking. Told him you remember more than we ever feared. A long, dreadful pause. So we took your mountain man, Clara. Took him quiet out behind the livery. 4 of us. He put 2 of us down before we got him. I'll give him that, he's a hard old wolf. But 4's 4. You're lying. Am I? Something thumped against the base of the door. Heavy. Sliding. Got proof. Open up and see. I'm not opening this door. Then I'll just leave his coat here on your step, Clemens said. And you can look at it through the window come morning, and you can wonder all night whether the rest of him's still attached to the inside of it. Reed wants you alive, see? That's the thing. Reed wants you to come down off this mountain on your own 2 feet and tell him every single thing you remember, every name, every face, everything you saw in that car, because Reed spent 11 years not knowing exactly how much you know, and it's eaten him alive. He's offering a trade. The whisper came back, but gloating now. You. For the hermit. You come down to the Reed Ranch by noon tomorrow, alone, unarmed, and tell Mr. Reed everything, and he lets the mountain man go free back up his hill, never bothered again. Or you stay up here safe and warm and we hang him in the morning for the 2 men he killed, and the law'll even call it just. You'll kill us both either way. Probably, Clemens agreed cheerfully. But this way you get to choose. This way you get to know it was your stubbornness that put the rope on him every minute you sit up here, safe behind your bar. Noon tomorrow, Clara. The Reed Ranch. Come alone or watch him swing. Boots shifted on the snow. I'll leave the coat. So, you know I'm not lying about having him. And then the boots crunched away into the dark, unhurried, and were gone. Clara stood frozen in the middle of the room for a long time. Then she went to the window and looked out, and there, in the gray snowlight on her step, lay Gideon Hayes's coat. The oiled buckskin coat he'd wrapped her in that first night, dark and crumpled, and unmistakably his, and a sound came out of her that she did not know. She was making a low animal sound of grief and rage twined together. She had done it again. She had let a man be kind to her, and she had killed him for it. Just like she'd feared in Cobb's store. Just like she'd told him that first night, I've done to you exactly what I do to everybody who's ever been fool enough to be kind to me. He'd said stop. He'd told her about his wife. He'd come down off 20 years of solitude to stand in the place he'd failed to stand once before. And Reed had taken him exactly the way Reed had taken everything. And now, the only man in the world who'd ever tipped his hat to her was going to hang at dawn unless she walked into Josiah Reed's house and handed him the one thing he'd wanted for 11 years. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass. Think, she whispered. Think, Clara. Don't you dare just feel it. Think. And slowly through the grief, the cold, clear part of her that had kept her alive 11 years began to turn it over. Reed wanted her alive. That was the crack in it. After all these years, after burning her shack, after every effort to put her in the ground, quietly, Reed now wanted her alive, and talking, because he'd realized he didn't know how much she knew, and a careful man can't kill what he hasn't finished measuring. That meant Reed could not simply shoot her on sight tomorrow. He'd want her in a room. He'd want to question her. He'd want every name and every detail out of her before he closed his hand. Which meant there would be a window, however small, between walking into the Reed Ranch and dying in it. A window where Reed was talking instead of killing. And there was the other thing. The thing Clemens didn't know he'd told her. He put 2 of us down before we got him. Gideon was alive. If they'd taken him to hang at dawn for the killing of 2 men, then he was alive now, tonight, held somewhere on the Reed Ranch. Not a coat, not a memory. A living man, the hardest man she'd ever known. A man who'd planned a war once and won it waiting. She was not walking into Reed's house to surrender. She was walking in to get him out. Clara turned from the window. She crossed to the chest where Gideon kept his things. The things he'd shown her over the long winter, in case he'd said a person ought to know where things are in case. She'd thought it was just a careful man being careful. Now she understood he'd been teaching her. All winter, without ever saying so, he'd been arming her. The pistol, the second pistol he kept wrapped in oilcloth. The little 2-shot Derringer small enough to hide in a boot. The knife, the box of cartridges. And the thing he'd shown her last. The thing he'd made her swear never to touch, unless the world was ending. The bundle of dynamite sticks he kept for blasting stumps and ice dams wrapped careful and stored cold and far from the fire. She knelt by the chest and she began methodically to take it all out. "All right, Mr. Reed," she said softly to the empty cabin, to the valley below, to the man who thought he'd finally won. "You want me alive and talking. You'll get me. You'll get every word you've waited 11 years to hear." She loaded the first pistol. "And then you'll find out what I learned on a mountain all winter long from a man you should never have touched." She loaded the second. Outside, far down in the dark valley, the lights of the Reed Ranch burned warm and certain and unafraid. The lights of a man who believed after 11 years that he had at last run his last loose thread to ground. He had no idea what was coming down the mountain for him in the morning. Clara came down off the mountain at first light, and she came down a different woman than the one Reed thought he'd summoned. She walked the road to the Reed Ranch with her hands empty and her chin level and her brother's coat buttoned to the throat. And under that coat, sewn into the lining and tucked into her boots and hidden against the small of her back, she carried everything Gideon Hayes had spent a winter teaching her to use. She did not hurry. She wanted them to see her coming. She wanted Reed standing at his window watching the tainted woman walk into his trap, certain smug 11 years of waiting about to pay out. She wanted him certain. Certain men don't look close. They were waiting in the yard. Clements first grinning a rifle in the crook of his arm, and behind him 3 more men with hard faces and ready guns, and behind them on the porch of the big ranch house, in a fine wool coat with a silver watch chain catching the morning light, stood Josiah Reed. He looked exactly as she remembered him from the boxcar. Older, cleaner, the same. "Miss Montgomery," Reed called down, pleasant as a man greeting a guest. "I confess I doubted you'd come. Harlan here bet me you'd sit up that mountain and let your friend swing. I told him no. I told him you were the loyal kind, the kind that can't bear to let another body pay for her sins." He came down the steps slow. It's a weakness, that loyalty, but a useful one, in a woman. "Where is he?" "Alive. For now. That part of the bargain holds long as you hold up yours." Reed stopped 10 feet from her and looked her over, and there was nothing of Clemence's leering in it which was worse. It was the look of a man appraising a tool. 11 years, he said softly. 11 years you've been a stone in my boot. A loose thread. Every night I've lain awake wondering exactly what a frightened child saw in the dark of a boxcar. And here you are, come down at last, to tell me. He smiled. "Search her, Harlan." Clara's heart stopped. "Reed, Search her. She's a clever girl. I'd be disappointed if she came unarmed." Clements handed off his rifle and came toward her grinning, and Clara forced herself to stand still. Forced herself to let it happen, because there was nothing else to do, and his hands went over her rough and lingering and ugly, and he found the pistol against her back almost at once, and pulled it free with a laugh. "Well, well, a woman alone on a mountain," Clara said tightly. "You'd carry a gun too." He kept searching. He found the second pistol in her coat. He found the knife. He patted down her legs, and Clara held her breath. Held it, and his hands stopped at her boots and squeezed the leather, and felt nothing because the derringer was flat against the inside of her ankle, and the boot was thick, and his hands were cold and careless, and he was already laughing too hard at the haul he'd made to do it right. "3 guns and a pig sticker," Clements crowed, holding them up. "And here I thought you came peaceful." "I came for Gideon," Clara said. Nothing more. Reed watched the weapons pile up in Clemence's arms, and his smile widened. "You see, this is what I appreciate about you, Miss Montgomery. You came armed for war, and yet here you stand disarmed in my yard because you'd rather die trying to save one scarred old hermit than live another day free. It's almost beautiful. It's almost a thing a man could admire." He turned. "Bring her inside. Bring the hermit up from the cellar. I find I want them to see each other one last time before we conclude our long, long acquaintance." They took her into the house. It was everything she'd known it would be. The house that train money built. The house her brother had died to fill. And Reed walked her through it like a host, while Clements and the others followed with their guns, and at the back, in a wide room, with a cold hearth. They stopped and a door was opened, and 2 men hauled Gideon Hayes up out of the dark. Clara made a sound she couldn't help. They'd beaten him. One eye was swollen near shut, and there was blood dried black in his gray beard, and he moved like a man with cracked ribs, slow and careful around the middle, his hands bound behind him. But he was alive, and when his good eye found her, his whole battered face changed, and the thing that crossed it was not relief. It was horror. "No," he said. His voice was wrecked. "No, Clara, you weren't supposed to. Why'd you come, you fool girl? Why'd you come down here? I told you not to open that door. I told you." "You're alive," she said. It came out broken. "That's all. You're alive. They were going to hang me regardless. You should have stayed up that mountain. You should have let me—" "Touching," Reed said. "Genuinely. But we've business." He settled himself into a chair by the cold hearth, crossed his legs, and folded his hands like a judge. "Now, Miss Montgomery, the bargain was your knowledge for his life, and I'm a man of my word, so let's have it. Everything. Start with the boxcar. Start with what you saw the night you've spent 11 years pretending you don't remember." And Clara understood that this was the window, the only window. Reed wanted the knowing, and the wanting was the one thing keeping all their guns silent, and every minute she talked was a minute she lived, and a minute closer to the only chance she'd have. So she talked. Slow. She made it count. "I was 12, she said. The gang had been holding me 4 months. Daniel was already dead. They kept me because—" her voice caught real, not performance. "Because Holloway said a girl was useful, could be sold or traded. So I was there in the camp the night the boss said a man was coming to collect his share of the Caldwell train job. And I was supposed to be asleep in the supply car. But I wasn't asleep." "Go on," Reed said softly. He was leaning forward now. 11 years of hunger in it. A man came in the dark. Fine horse, fine coat. And the boss met him, and they talked low, and I heard the boss say— She looked Reed dead in the eye. I heard the boss say, "You picked clean this time, Josiah. The Caldwell box was light. You're slipping or you're skimming." And the man laughed and said, "Just keep hitting the cars, I tell you, and let me worry about the books." She watched the color move under Reed's skin. "You told them which trains, which cars, for years. And when the marshals got close, you gave the gang up everyone. You put the rope around your own partner's necks to save your name, and I watched them hang for crimes you planned. Holloway, Pike, Daniel's killer, and 8 others. All of them swinging on your word while you bought a window for the church." The room had gone dead silent. And Clements, holding the confiscated guns, was staring at the back of Reed's head with a new and uncertain expression, and Clara saw it, and she struck for it like she'd struck for the crack in the door 3 months ago. "He never told you, did he, Harlan?" she said. "Any of you. You all think you're working for an honest rich man with a grudge against an outlaw woman. You don't know you're cleaning up after the man who built half this county on robbery and then sold his own people to hang for it. You're standing in a room with the worst back shooter in the territory, and he's let you think you're the law." "Quiet," Reed said. "How's it feel, boys, knowing the man you'd kill a woman for would sell every one of you to the rope the same as he sold Holloway the day you stopped being useful?" I said quiet. Reed was on his feet now, the pleasant mask gone, and that was good. That was what she wanted. A careful man rattled is a careful man not counting heads. You think you're clever. You've always thought you were clever even as a child, those eyes watching everything. He crossed to her. "But cleverness needs proof, Miss Montgomery, and you have none. A dead woman's word against mine. Because that's what you are. Dead. You died in a fire 3 months ago. The records say so. And a dead woman can't testify. And a hermit murderer can't testify. And so all your knowing, all 11 years of it, dies right here in this room with the 2 of you. You've told me what I needed. I know now you've no paper, no witness, nothing but a child's memory." He smiled, and it was the smile from the saloon porch the night he sent Clements to burn her. "Which means I no longer need you alive." He turned to Clements. "Take them out back, both of them. Make it look like the hermit killed her and then himself, fugitives, despair, whatever fits." I'm done. 11 years, and I'm finally... Josiah. Gideon's voice. Quiet. Wrecked and quiet, and something in it made Reed stop and turn. You said a name a minute ago, Gideon said. He was swaying on his feet, blood in his beard, but his good eye was clear, and it was fixed on Reed with a terrible calm. Caldwell. The Caldwell train job. You named it yourself just now in front of all these men. The light box. The skimming. He smiled, and it split his cracked lip fresh. Now, how would I know to find that name in a ledger, Josiah, if you hadn't just handed it to me? Reed went very still. You think Clara came down here with nothing? Gideon's voice gathered strength. You think I spent all winter just keeping her warm? I went looking for Amos Tucker, Josiah, your freighter, your messenger, the man who carried your word to the gang for 11 years and kept every receipt because Amos Tucker is a careful man too, and a careful man who works for a backshooter keeps something to save his own neck. Tucker's gone, Reed said, but his voice had changed. Tucker left the territory years back. Tucker's in Cheyenne, Gideon said. I found him in 3 days, and Tucker's got a strongbox, Josiah, freight manifests, bank drafts in your hand. A letter you were fool enough to write the winter of the Caldwell job. 11 years he's sat on it waiting to see if it'd ever be worth more than the danger of holding it. And a week ago a scarred old hermit rode into Cheyenne and offered him something worth more than money. A way to be on the right side of it when it finally came down. You're bluffing. But Reed's hand had drifted to his vest. You're bluffing. You came down that mountain alone. You came asking. I came asking so you'd hear I was asking, Gideon said. So you'd take me. So you'd be so busy with the hermit and the woman you'd never once wonder where Amos Tucker was while you did it. He's not in Cheyenne anymore, Josiah. And here the old man's battered face turned slow toward the front of the house, toward the road, toward the sound that had just begun faint under the wind. The sound of horses. Many horses. He's about a quarter-mile out, with a strongbox, and a federal marshal named Caleb Sterling, who's been building a case on the Holloway hangings for 2 years and was missing just one thing. The hoofbeats grew. A living witness, Gideon said, to put a face to the paper. For one frozen heartbeat, nobody in the room moved. And then Reed's careful world came apart all at once, and he clawed the pistol from his vest and swung it. Not at Gideon, but at Clara, at the witness. At the one thing that could hang him screaming, "She dies first!" And in that same instant, Clara dropped to her knee, the way Gideon had drilled her 100 times in the snow, her hand already diving for her boot, and the derringer came up small and ugly in her fist, and she fired. The shot took Reed through the shoulder and spun him, and his pistol roared into the floorboards. Then the room exploded into gunfire. Clements grabbed for a gun, and Gideon bound as he was drove his shoulder into the deputy, and they went down together in a tangle, and one of Reed's men fired wild and hit the man beside him. And Clara rolled behind the cold hearth with the spent derringer and one shot left in it, and her heart going like a hammer. Glass shattered as the front door burst inward. Boots. Shouts. Federal marshals, drop your weapons. Drop them now. But Clements had gotten free, and Clements had his rifle, and Clements was not thinking about marshals anymore. He was thinking about the woman who'd thrown boiling water in his man's face, who'd outsmarted him at the cabin door, who'd just shot his employer and ruined everything. And he came around the hearth with murder plain on his face and the rifle coming level. And Clara had one shot. One, and her hand was steady. The way Gideon had taught her, it must be steady. You don't get scared until after Clara, after never during, and she fired. The last derringer shot caught Clements high in the chest. He stopped. He looked down at himself with an expression of pure offended surprise, and then his legs went out from under him, and he sat down hard against the wall, and did not get up, and the rifle clattered from his hands. And Harlan Clements, who had grabbed a girl's wrist in a store, and nailed her windows shut in a blizzard, and whispered through a cabin door, died on the floor of Josiah Reed's fine house with the look of a man who'd never once believed it could happen to him. And then it was over. It was over fast. The way real violence is always over fast. And when the smoke thinned, there were marshals in the room, 6 of them, and at their center, a lean man with a star on his coat and gray eyes that missed nothing. Caleb Sterling, and behind him, a nervous freighter clutching a strongbox to his chest like a child. Amos Tucker, who took one look at Reed bleeding on his own floor and said, "I'll tell you everything. I'll tell you all of it. Just write down. It was me that came forward. You write that down." "Nobody's writing anything till these folks are seen to," Sterling said. His eyes had found Gideon, who'd gotten himself to a sitting position against the wall, hands still bound ribs, surely screaming. "Hayes, you're a hard man to keep alive." "Cut me loose, Caleb," Gideon said, "and go see to her." But Clara was already across the room, was already on her knees beside him, sawing at the ropes on his wrists with Clemence's own knife. And when the ropes came free, Gideon brought his arms around in front of him, slow and painful, and then he reached up and took her face in his two scarred hands. And for a long moment, the two of them just looked at each other in the wreckage, the half-frozen girl he'd carried up a mountain, and the silent man who'd come down off it for her, and neither of them said a word, because there were no words yet for the size of it. "You came down the mountain," Clara finally whispered. "You let them take you. You walked into it on purpose. To draw them. To buy time for Tucker and the marshal." Her voice shook. "You used yourself as bait. You could have died. You almost did. Couldn't think of another way to get a careful man to stop being careful," Gideon said. His thumb moved against her cheek. "And I reckoned you'd come. I reckoned you'd come down and stand in the gap. I was counting on it." His battered face creased. "First time in 20 years, I counted on another soul, and wasn't let down." Across the room, Josiah Reed was being lifted to his feet. His shoulder bound his fine coat, ruined his silver watch chain, hanging broken. And he stared at the two of them on the floor, with an expression of such pure disbelief that it was almost pitiable, the look of a man who had been certain, completely certain, for 11 years, watching that certainty turn to ash in front of him. "A hermit," he said hoarsely. "A hermit and a tainted woman. I built an empire. I had judges. I had this whole county in my pocket. And I'm undone by a hermit and a—" "You're undone," Sterling said, snapping the irons shut on Reed's wrists. "By a freight ledger, a federal warrant, and a witness you spent 11 years failing to kill. The woman's testimony. Tucker's paper, and your own mouth running in front of 6 lawmen who just heard you order 2 murders. He hauled Reed toward the door. "Josiah Reed, you're under arrest for the train robberies on the Union Pacific Line, for conspiracy in the Holloway gang killings for arson, and for the murder of Daniel Montgomery, age 18, and any other soul we turn up before we're through. You'll hang. Same rope you sent your partners to. Only difference is, this time it'll be earned." They took him out. He did not go quiet. He twisted in the marshal's grip at the threshold and looked back, and his eyes found Clara one last time, and whatever was left of the church-smiling man was gone, and what stared out was just the boxcar, just the dark, just the thing she'd seen by firelight when she was 12 years old. "You should have stayed asleep, girl," Josiah Reed said. "I tried," Clara said. "For 11 years I tried." She got to her feet and she helped Gideon Hayes to his, and she stood there with the man's arm across her shoulders and her arm around his battered ribs, holding each other up in the wreckage of the house that train money built. But somebody had to stay awake. Somebody had to remember Daniel's name, and it turned out to be me. They dragged Josiah Reed out into the morning light, into the yard, where he'd thought to watch her die, and they put him on a horse, and they took him away to Cheyenne to hang, and Clara Montgomery stood in the doorway with Gideon and watched him go until the road was empty, and the only sound was the wind coming down off Widow's Peak, clean and cold and free. Behind her, Amos Tucker set his strongbox down on Reed's own table and opened it, and Caleb Sterling began to lay out 11 years of paper, the freight manifests and the bank drafts, and the letter in Reed's own hand, the proof that would clear a dead woman's name and bring her back to life. And somewhere in the long pile of it near the bottom was a thing that made Clara cross the room when Sterling lifted it. A scrap of paper, a name on a list of the gang's holdings recovered marked. One Coat Boys recovered Caldwell site. Holloway gang. Unclaimed. Daniel's coat. The one she was wearing. The one her brother had died in. They'd had it in evidence 11 years, and never known whose it was. Never known there was a sister, never known anything but the lie Reed had built. Clara pressed it to her chest, and finally, in the ruined house of the man who'd taken everything, with the only man who'd ever given her anything alive and breathing at her side, she let herself believe it was over. She did not yet know what came next. She only knew that for the first time since she was 12 years old, there was a next, and it was hers, and no town, and no rich man, and no whispered lie could take it from her ever again. The trial took 6 weeks, and Bitter Creek came to watch the world it had built come down. They held it in Cheyenne in a courtroom too small for the crowd, and Clara Montgomery sat in the witness chair in a clean dress, with Daniel's coat folded over her lap, and told the truth she'd carried for 11 years to a room full of strangers who this time had to listen. Caleb Sterling laid out the paper first, the freight ledgers and the bank drafts and the letter in Reed's own hand, so that by the time Clara spoke, the room already knew the shape of the man in the dock. And then she gave them the boxcar. The dark, the low voices, the name she'd heard. Josiah. The face by firelight. She gave it to them plain and steady, the way Gideon had taught her to do everything that frightened her. And when Reed's bought lawyer rose to call her a liar, a gangwoman, a girl who'd say anything, Sterling simply laid Amos Tucker's strongbox open on the table and let the paper do the answering. "The defense calls the witness a liar," Sterling told the jury. 11 years the whole territory called her that. Convenient, wasn't it, for the man who needed her not believed? He lifted the letter in Reed's hand. But paper doesn't lie. And this paper says everything that frightened child said is true. Reed did not look at her once. Not through the whole 6 weeks. He sat in his fine coat gone shabby and stared at the wall, and Clara understood that this was its own kind of confession, that a man who could look the governor in the eye could not look at the girl who'd undone him, and she found she did not need him to. She'd spent 11 years needing Bitter Creek to see her. She didn't anymore. The seeing she'd needed she already had, and it was sitting 3 rows back with a healing scar, and gray in his beard, watching her with those creek ice eyes every minute she was on that stand. The jury was out 40 minutes. Guilty. Every count. The train robberies, the conspiracy, the arson, and the murder of Daniel Montgomery, age 18. The judge set the hanging for the spring, and they took Josiah Reed out of that courtroom in irons, and as they passed her chair, he stopped just for a moment, and finally, he looked at her. "You've got nothing now you didn't have before," he said low just for her. "A dead boy in a ruined town. You think this gives you peace? You'll find it doesn't. I'll be gone, and you'll still be the woman they whispered about. That doesn't wash off, girl. I made sure of it 11 years ago. You'll carry what I made you to your grave." And Clara Montgomery looked up at the man who had taken her brother. Her name, her childhood, and 11 years of her life, and she felt the thing he was reaching for. The old fear, the old shame, reach back up out of the dark in her, and then she felt it let go. "You're half right," she said. "I'll carry it. Daniel, the boxcar, all of it. I'll carry every day of my life. But you've got the rest wrong, Josiah, the way you got everything wrong. You thought if you made enough people hate me, the truth would die when I did. You never once figured the truth might be stronger than the lie, that it might just sit quiet on a mountain all winter and wait." She stood, and Daniel's coat hung over her arm, and she did not raise her voice. "You're going to hang in the spring on the same rope you sent Holloway to, and I'm going to live. That's the difference between us. You bet everything on people staying afraid. And I stopped being afraid the day a man tipped his hat to me in a store, and the whole town couldn't stop him." She walked past him out of the courtroom, and she did not look back, and that was the last time Clara Montgomery ever laid eyes on Josiah Reed. Bitter Creek did not know what to do with her after that. The town that had refused her bread now could not meet her eyes on the street, and Ezekiel Cobb, when she walked into his store a week after the verdict went white, and started talking before the bell had stopped ringing. "Miss Montgomery." "Clara. What happened in here the day with the deputy. You have to understand, a man's got to live in this town. I couldn't—" "I'm not here for an apology, Mr. Cobb." No, course not." He swallowed. "What can anything? On the house. Anything you need. I'll pay for what I take same as always." She set her coins on the counter, the same counter she'd thrown them across 3 months and a lifetime ago. I never wanted anything from this town but to be sold flour at a fair price for honest money. That's all. You could have given me that. Any day in 3 years you could have just given me that, and you didn't, because it was easier to go along. She gathered her goods. I'm not angry anymore, Mr. Cobb. I used to be. It ate me alive. But you're going to have to live the rest of your life in a town that knew the truth and chose the lie because the lie was free. That's punishment enough. I wouldn't add to it if I could. She left him there gray-faced behind his counter, and she walked out through the middle of Bitter Creek with her chin level, and this time when the people stepped aside, it was not in disgust. It was in shame. And Clara found she did not much care which it was. She'd stopped needing the town to tell her who she was. She'd found that out for herself on a mountain over a long winter. The exoneration came formal in the early spring, a paper from the territorial court clearing her name of every charge the lie had ever hung on her, declaring her what she'd always been, a victim and a witness and an innocent. Sterling brought it up the mountain himself, rode all the way up to Widow's Peak to put it in her hands, and he found the two of them at work on the cabin, rebuilding the wall the siege had torn through Gideon's ribs, healed enough now to swing a hammer, and Clara handing up the boards. Figured you'd want this delivered proper, Sterling said, dismounting. Not mailed? He handed her the paper. It's done, Miss Montgomery. Official. The territory says you're innocent. Has said it now in ink. He paused. For whatever the territory's word is worth to you after how it's treated you. Clara read it. The seal, the signatures, 11 years of lie struck through in a single line, and she waited to feel the thing she'd dreamed of feeling for so long, the great rushing freedom of it, the vindication. It came quieter than she'd expected. It came like the thaw slow loosening a thing that had been frozen hard, finally letting go drop by drop. Thank you, Marshal, she said. It matters, not the way I thought it would, but it matters. Sterling nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. There's the matter of the reward, too. Reed had a price on his crimes, federal money, and it's yours by rights, you and Hayes both. It's a considerable sum, Miss Montgomery. Enough to go anywhere. Start over any place you like where nobody's ever heard the name Montgomery or the word they hung on it. He looked at her careful. Man could understand a woman wanting to put 1,000 miles between herself and a town like Bitter Creek. Wanting to go somewhere clean, somewhere new where the story's never been told. And there it was. The question under the question. The thing the marshal was really asking. Are you going to run? After everything? Are you going to take the money and go be somebody else, somewhere they don't know the way? Any sensible person would. Clara looked at the paper in her hand. Then she looked at the cabin, the half-mended wall, the mountain rising up behind it, white still at the peak, but greening at the base where the spring was climbing. And she looked at Gideon Hayes standing there with a hammer in his hand and sawdust in his gray beard, and his ribs not quite healed, watching her, and she saw in his face that he was bracing for it, that 20 years of being left had taught him to expect it, that he'd already decided in his quiet way, that of course she'd go, of course she would, that nobody stayed, that the warm thing always walked back down the mountain in the end. She handed the marshal back the paper. Keep my half of the reward for the Montgomery name, she said. There's a boy buried in a pauper's plot outside Bitter Creek with no stone. Daniel Montgomery, age 18, who died protecting his sister and got called an outlaw's kin for it. Buy him a stone, a real one. Carve on it that he was brave and that he was loved and that his sister knew the truth even when nobody else would. Spend it all on that if it takes it. Her voice held steady. That's the only thing the money can buy that I want. And the rest? Where do you want it sent? What town? No town. Clara turned and looked at the mountain. Send it nowhere. I'm not going anywhere. Sterling went still. Miss Montgomery, you don't have to stay in this country. After what it's done to you, a woman with means can go anywhere. That's just it, Marshal. She walked to Gideon's side, and she took the hammer from his hand, not because she meant to use it, but because she wanted to stand close to him, when she said, It wanted him to hear it from arm's length. For 3 years staying meant I had nowhere else to go. The line shack wasn't a home. It was just the only place that'd have me. I stayed because I was trapped. She looked up at the scarred man beside her. But I'm not trapped anymore. I've got a paper says I'm free, and a reward says I'm rich, and a whole country I could disappear into. For the first time in 11 years, I can go anywhere on this earth I please. Her voice gentled. And I'm choosing to stay right here. That's the difference. I'm not staying because I have to. I'm staying because I want to. Because this is the first place in my whole life I ever once felt safe, and it's not the mountain that made it safe, Marshall. She set the hammer down on the half-built wall. It's him. Gideon Hayes did not say anything for a long moment. The man who'd carried her through a blizzard, who'd let himself be taken to spring a trap, who'd spent 20 years, certain he'd never have one more good thing in this life, just looked at her. And his throat worked, and when he finally spoke, his voice came out rough as gravel. "You're sure?" he said. "You're real sure, Clara. Because I'm an old man with a wrecked face and a hard history, and you're young and free now and rich and the world's wide open to you. I won't hold you to anything you said in the bad weather. A person says things in the cold they don't mean in the thaw. You can go. I'd not blame you. His jaw tightened. I'd want you to. If going's what's right for you, I'd want you gone, and I'd be glad I got to be the one to see you safe to it." And Clara Montgomery understood in that moment the whole shape of the man, that even now, even loving her, even after all of it, he would open his hand and let her go free rather than ask her to stay for him. That he'd rather lose her to her own freedom than keep her one day past her wanting. That this was the difference between Gideon Hayes and every other man who'd ever looked at her, that the others had wanted to own her and he only wanted her free. It was the surest she'd ever been of anything. 20 years ago, you lost your wife to a man like Reed, Clara said. And you came up this mountain and decided you were done. You decided you'd never have anything good again, because everything good gets taken. And then one day you came down for powder and salt, and you saw a girl getting her bread refused, and something in you that you thought was dead stood up and walked into that store. She took his rough, scarred hands in both of hers. You didn't do that for a stranger, Gideon. You did it because 20 years of being alone taught you exactly what it costs when good men go along. You came down off this mountain for me before you ever knew my name, and you've been giving me my freedom back piece by piece every day since, and now you're standing here trying to give me the last piece, the freedom to leave you. Her eyes filled. Well, I'm using it. Right now. I'm taking that freedom and I'm spending it. And what I'm choosing free and clear, with the whole wide world to pick from, is you. This mountain. This cabin. This life. You hear me, Gideon Hayes. I choose to stay. Not because I'm trapped. Because I'm free. And you're what I want. For the first time since she'd known him, the man who never wept put his face down against her hair and shook. They were married that summer. It was a small thing, no church, no town, no congregation that had spent 3 years whispering. Caleb Sterling rode up to stand witness, and a circuit preacher came the long way round, and they spoke their words in front of the rebuilt cabin with the mountain at their backs, and the whole green valley rolling away below them, the valley that held Bitter Creek, somewhere down in its folds, small now, far away, meaningless. Clara wore a dress the color of mountain wildflowers, and she carried no bouquet, but she had Daniel's coat folded over a chair where she could see it, so that some part of her brother stood up with her, so that the boy who'd died protecting her got to see his sister safe at last. He'd have liked you, she told Gideon that evening, the two of them sitting out front, as the light went long and gold over the peaks. Daniel. He'd have liked you something fierce. He was always after me to be braver than I was, to stop apologizing for taking up space in the world. She leaned into his side. You'd have gotten on. I'd have liked to shake the hand of the man who raised you, Gideon said. Because somebody taught you to stand in a store full of people who hated you and not bow your head. That wasn't nothing. That was somebody's love holding you up. It was his. And then for 3 years it was just memory. And then, she looked up at him. and then it was yours. The years came kind to them after that, kinder than either had any right to expect. The cabin grew. Gideon added rooms and a real barn, and Clara made the place into something it had never been in his 20 years of solitude. A home with 2 chairs at the table, and bread that rose, and a door that stood open to the summer air, because there was nothing left in all the world that either of them needed to bar it against. Word of the trial spread, and the country changed its mind about the tainted woman the way countries do. Slow and shamefaced, and never quite admitting it had been wrong, and travelers started tipping their hats to her on the rare occasions she came down to town. The gesture that had once been denied her, now given freely automatically by people who'd forgotten they'd ever withheld it. She let them. She didn't need it anymore, but she let them because she'd learned that the tip of a hat could mean a man saw your humanity, and she'd learned it from the only one who'd given it to her when it cost him something. Josiah Reed hanged that spring on the same rope in the same yard where Holloway and the others had swung on his word 11 years before. Clara did not go to watch. She'd thought she might want to, had wondered through the long winter whether she'd need to see it to believe it was finished. But when the day came, she stayed on the mountain with Gideon, and they planted the first garden in the thawed ground. Instead knelt together in the dark soil, putting in seed. And somewhere far below, a wicked man paid for everything he'd done, and up on Widow's Peak, 2 people who'd been left for dead in the snow put living things into the earth and watched the sun come up. That was the better answer. She knew it in her bones. Reed had bet his whole life that fear was stronger than truth, that a frightened girl would die quiet, and a bought town would look away forever, and a careful man could outrun the things he'd done. And he'd been wrong about every part of it. The girl had lived. The truth had waited. And the only thing that finally caught up to Josiah Reed wasn't a bullet or a mob or revenge. It was a witness who refused to stay silent, and a hermit who refused to stay alone. 2 broken people who found each other in a blizzard and decided together that the wicked do not get to write the ending. Years later, when Clara Montgomery Hayes was an old woman, gray-haired and full-figured, still and sharp-eyed. Yet she would sit on the porch of the cabin on Widow's Peak and tell the story to anyone who climbed up to hear it. She'd tell them about the coins she threw across Cobb's counter, and the deputy who took her wrist, and the giant who filled the doorway and said, "Let her go." She'd tell them about the blizzard and the windows nailed shut, and the long fall into the snow, and the man who came out into a storm no sane soul would enter following nothing but a feeling, and the memory of a woman who'd said she had nowhere safe. She'd tell them about the winter on the mountain, and the trap they sprang, and the strongbox, and the marshal at the door. And she'd tell them how a town that called her tainted faded into nothing in the valley below, while everything good in her life had been built up here in the high, clean air, with the one man who never once looked at her with anything but the plain respect she'd always been owed. And when they asked her how she'd survived it, all of it, the cruelty and the lie and the cold, how a girl the whole world threw away had ended up with everything that mattered, the old woman would look out over the valley where Bitter Creek had long since dried up and blown away, and she'd put her hand over her husband's scarred one on the arm of the chair beside her, and she would give them the only answer there ever was. She would tell them that the town had called her tainted, and the town had been wrong, and the proof of how wrong was that she had lived a long, full beloved life in the exact place they'd left her to die, with the exact man who'd refused to let them. She would tell them that the world is full of people who go along, and that all it takes to break their power is one soul who won't. And she would tell them, with the certainty of a woman who had earned every word of it across a lifetime, that no lie ever told about a person is stronger than the truth of how they choose to live, and that she had chosen in the end not to be the woman they made her, but the woman she was, innocent, unbroken, and loved beyond the reach of any whisper here on this mountain, until the very end of her days. And that was the truth of Clara Montgomery, and no town on earth could ever call it anything else again.